Just before this video starts, I just want to say sorry for the delay in uploading. This was a big video and I got sick with Nurgle's plague during editing, and that's no joke. I had like 50 plague flies in my room and I felt really sick. Anyway, I wanted to say that if you would like to keep updated, feel free to follow me on Twitter, as I will post and keep people updated on how videos are coming along. And also, I might do polls so people can tell me what they want me to talk about next. Last is a special thanks to Orcfella on Reddit. I'm not one to usually do self-promotion as it seems a bit scummy, but seeing my last video on the forums really gave me motivation to make videos, and you know, that I really appreciate that, so thank you. And anyway, enjoy.
Wise to send me here, Grandfather Nurgle. There is so much life here in want of time. Let the galaxy rot away and all come to Nurgle. Come with me to death. For I carry the plague kiss of Nurgle to this world.
I don't think anyone can deny that Fat Shark clearly have a fetish for all things Nurgle. They clearly loved him so much in Vermintide that they had to add Nurgle to Darktide as well. I've been scouring over the forums the last few days, and it's clear some people have different opinions on Nurgle being the focus enemy for this game. I'm only joking. To be fair, a lot of these guys on the forums are actually making really good suggestions and giving great feedback. For example, the guy who was posting about no generic looking zombies was making the point that Warhammer has so many distinct looking races that when people play this, they need to know that this is a Warhammer 40k game and not a zombie game. Also, we have a game like Back 4 Blood in the works, being worked on by Total Rock Studios, which made Left 4 Dead, so I can understand people wanting clarification that this is not a Left 4 Dead game and really has its Warhammer 40k aspects that differ it from that genre. Another post was talking about the different enemies we could have had instead of Nurgle, like Genes to the Cult, and I really like what Void Dragon was getting here, explaining that what made Vermintide 1 and 2 great was the giant rats. The Skaven, the first enemy in the game. Obviously, this is a great point, as it made the game stand out and show the Warhammer fantasy setting that no other game could compare to. He then goes on talking about Genes to the Cult would have made a better enemy and shown Warhammer 40k genre better and to stand out more. I can completely agree with this also. Whilst Space Hulk Deathwing I don't think truly gave us the variation on Genes to the Cult enemies, it still was a very unique enemy type and once again stood out amongst other games. But this brings me on to the point about why did Fat Shark pick Nurgle? Clearly Games Workshop trust them enough to make another game approving Darktide, so why was the chosen enemy Nurgle? It could have been one of the other Chaos Gods, or a different race entirely, but they chose Nurgle. Well, my first reason is they did not have enough money, or they were not approved for another god. Games Workshop usually don't like to give out the whole IP of their game, or their genre, or whatever you want to call it. I guess the IP is probably the word I'm looking for. They cut little bits here and there for a developer to use to make a game. For example, look at Space Marine, one of the best games in Warhammer 40k. Clearly for that game, they got approved for Orcs, different variations of Orcs, Chaos Space Marines, the 3 different types being Tactical, Devastator and Assault I believe, and lastly, one Khorne Demon model. I know there are a few others in there like the Traitor Guardsman, but it's usually 1 or 2 units. Vermintide 1, as another example, they got approved for Skaven, which were Skaven Slaves, Clan Rats, Storm Vermin, Hook Rats, Assassins, Rattling Gunners, Poison Wind and Rat Ogres. Yet again, there's probably 1 or 2 more, but probably perhaps the boss. But even though Skaven had way more units, they were only given those ones to make a game. The other reason why I think Nurgle was chosen was for a marketing standpoint. Perhaps Games Workshop knew that people would buy zombie games, hence why picking a race that sort of resembles that might sell better. Or because Nurgle is one of those races in Warhammer 40k that has recently been fleshed out in the hobby. When you go into a Warhammer store after playing Darktide, for example, you will easily recognise Poxwalkers and other models from the Death Guard branch of models. And let's be honest, it's going to be easier to sell a game with zombies on the front cover to your child than a game focused around Celeste demons showing their cocks and tits on the front cover instead. One guy on the forums made a great point about why Nurgle might have been chosen over something like Genestealer Cult, as it allows for loads more DLC possibility in the game. A Chaos faction like Nurgle can team up with Beastmen, Demons, Dark Mechanicum, etc, and I'll go into those in more detail later in the video, but as you can see, when compared to Genestealer Cult, they don't really have any possible allies unless it was like Tyranids, which, don't get me wrong, I would love an Imperial Guard game versus Tyranids, it would have been my wet dream. But I think in the Underhive, this would not make too much sense. Obviously, Genestealer Cult would. What Fatshark could do is just say that Nurgle and Genestealer Cult happen to be fighting in the same area for the DLC, allowing it for it to work in the lore and for them not being allies. Anyway, enough about the lore on why Fatshark chose Nurgle. They have, so let's talk about what we could be seeing. First thing I'm going to do is break down the enemies into different types, being Infantry, Elites, Special, Monsters, and Lords. I imagine Darktide will have a very similar system to Vermintide, Infantry being your slaves and clan rats, Elite is your storm vermin and plague monks, Special of course is your assassins and rattling gunners, Monsters your rat ogres and trolls, and lastly Lords like Rastinid and Death Rattler. Now I'm basing my picks for this video that for Darktide's release we will get a mix of Death Guard and Nurgle demons. So you may disagree, but from the trailer I think that's what this game will be based around, at least for the start. Also, with my picks, I'm going to try and be as balanced as possible. What I mean by this is that something that I could actually see working lore and gameplay wise that our 4 veterans could take on. One person made a great point in one of my previous videos about a Plague Marine being far too much of a powerful enemy that Guardsmen could take on. But I've read lore about 2 Guardsmen taking on a single Plague Marine, and at the same time, from a gameplay standpoint, I mean look at Vermintide. 4 heroes take on rat ogres and trolls, or look at Goktrek and Felix as an example of what can be defeated in Warhammer Fantasy. So as you can imagine, no Great Unclean One or Mortarion will be mentioned. However, it would not surprise me if we don't get clues and hints from dialogue or audio devices in game about the presence of them in the 40k universe. So starting with Infantry, we first have Nurglings. Nurglings are lesser demons of Nurgle that erupt from the boils of Great Unclean Ones or Greater Demons of Nurgle. Whilst they are not powerful demons in their own right, they have great numbers, and are not afraid to bite, claw and tear anything that catches their fancy. They are also quite mischievous little giggling laughing creatures, so I hope we actually see this in game, which would give them a really creepy vibe. But it does say they usually hang around the demon that birthed them into the world. However, it has been known that they will follow Nurgle's blessing, which could be working with Plague Bearers or Death Guard. But the Nurgling's role is quite simple, to swarm the enemy, and to be that lovely enemy you can one-shot with any weapon, like Skaven slaves. Most likely this enemy as well will be able to ambush, so for example you might hear little giggles and laughter around you, similar to Skaven whispering, and one of the characters might go, Nurgling ambush. Our next infantry enemy is Plague Zombies or Poxwalkers. Now some people say that these are the same thing and others say they aren't at the same time. It's a bit of a grey area. Also that Nurgle cultists will eventually turn into something like Plague Zombies and Poxwalkers, not having a mind of their own and being mutated. Also Games Workshop even themselves said that they are basically the same thing, and for copyright reasons it's much easier to copyright Poxwalkers than Plague Zombies, hence why I believe the enemy in the trailer was Poxwalkers, but at the end of the day it really doesn't matter. But Poxwalkers, if you did not get the hint by Plague Zombie, are cursed victims of Nurgle's plagues, transformed into unliving weapons of the Death Guard. Their bodies slowly begin to rot and shutting down and start to mutate with horns, tentacles similar to those of Nurgle plague bearers. But the very worst and creepy part is that the victim is still fully conscious and aware, unlike a zombie, trapped with a hideous grin staggering off in search of more people to infect. The Dark Imperium novel really describes this transformation beautifully. Poxwalkers are going to probably be the enemy that you will see more than any other in the game. Judging by the trailer, you will clearly be dealing with them as a main threat. I also imagine that they are going to be great tar pit enemies, ones that really waste your ammunition if not managed carefully, and perhaps take a few hits to kill due to them having the blessing of Nurgle. Poxwalkers also wield battle debris as crude weapons, such as blunt objects and sticks with metal parts sticking out. Some even choose to use their own tentacles and horns as weapons. Later on I am going to discuss variations of Poxwalkers that I think we could be seeing also. My last infantry enemy is Chaos Cultists, as they are part of the Death Guard army roster, and I think it's very possible we could be seeing some Plague Cults in game. Plague Cults are Chaos Cults who serve Nurgle, who wish to spread his plague to regions of their world. Their weapons can consist of auto guns, auto pistol, heavy stubber, flamer and shotguns. I don't think we'll see melee weapon variations of Chaos Cultists, simply because that would not really make them very unique. Obviously the main reason being that Chaos Cultists can actually use ranged weapons unlike Potswalkers and Nurglings, allowing for that balance of units like how Beastmen have Ungor Raiders as archers in Vermintide to put pressure on you from a distance. Those are the infantry enemies that I do believe we will be getting in the base game. It's very possible we could have more, but looking at Vermintide 1 and 2 for reference, I believe we have the 3 main areas covered for a light enemy. Nurglings being the one swing, one kill enemy that ambush in great numbers, Potswalkers being your standard enemies like clan rats that you find standing around being idle, and Chaos Cultists as a range attack enemy to force you to dodge and move position. Moving on to our elites, we first have Armoured Poxwalkers. Nothing really special about them. Obviously some Poxwalkers are covered in more armour than others, like an Imperial Guard might get infected by Nurgle's Plague while still wearing his flak armour. The Armoured Poxwalkers would be harder to kill and hit, with either requiring you to attack weak spots or charge a heavy attack. Moving on to our second elite and demon, we have Plague Bearers. Plague Bearers are foot soldiers of Nurgle's demonic legions. They have horns and tentacles similar to Poxwalkers, with their bodies covered in filth and parasites, but they are very resilient, able to soak up bolt shells and lasfire with ease due to Nurgle's gifts, usually wielding a plague sword that corrupts flesh on touch, leaving the victim with Nurgle's plague. I believe Plague Bearers are going to fill a similar role to the Chaos Warrior in Vermintide 2, soaking up a lot of damage and hitting extremely hard overhead attacks in return. Unlike a Chaos Warrior though, I believe that this unit won't have any armour, being able to be hit by light attacks, but instead will have a huge HP pool. One other thing to note is that I also believe the Plague Bearer will also come in patrols on the map with other Plague Bearers, chanting hymns and counting numbers, which you will have to be stealthy about to avoid, similar to patrols in Vermintide. And now, I could leave it there on elites, and this is something I've wanted to mention. Do you think we'll get as many enemies on launch as Vermintide 1 or 2? I mean, Vermintide 1 only launched with one elite, the Storm Vermin, so could the Plague Bearer be all we get on launch? You'll have to let me know in the comments, but do you think the game will have as much content as Verm 1 or Verm 2 on launch? However, if I had to choose another elite, I believe it would be a variation of the Plague Bearer, similar to how Storm Vermin have Storm Vermin with shields. One perhaps that has a form of shield or armour, which could perhaps be bones sticking out of it because of course Plague Bearers don't have shields, or one that uses clouds or flies to be a shield from range attacks. My very last elite that I believe we could be seeing, and this is a bit of a controversial one, is a Pestigore. Now, Beastmen do exist in 40k, but they've never really been given much love since 2nd edition. It was because they were sort of a byproduct of Genesealer, but was then shoved aside, and their main fluff in the lore was that they were sort of a strain of Abhuman who in the Imperial Guard were used as meat shields. However, with Zangords being in the Thousand Suns army list, and also Beastmen showing up in Blackstone Fortress as enemies, it's very possible we could be seeing Pestigores in Darktide. Pestigores are beastmen of Nurgle that have the often cracked flesh and disease that comes with devoting to Nurgle. Now, the reason I believe this one is a bit controversial is because would it be lazy or fat shark to use beastmen models from Vermintide in Darktide, obviously changing some textures and effects, making them look more Nurgling, and then shoving them into Darktide as an enemy? Personally, I would say it's not. I mean, as long as they show enough distinction from the one in Vermintide, I'd be happy. Also, it's likely that they would not do that, as making a whole new model entirely would probably be more effective. Now, the reason why Pestigores could be one of the best elite enemies in Darktide is because they have one thing that pretty much every other Nurgle unit does not have: speed. Even though Pestigores have the mark of Nurgle with Nurgle's Rot, they surprisingly keep their Vigor characteristics that make them very useful in battle, and this is where I believe the Pestigores would shine in Darktide, being an enemy very similar to the Savages or Plague Monks in Vermintide. Pestigores could have dual weapons running towards you at great speed, and then do that similar animation to Savages or Plague Monks, where blocking one of their hits won't stagger them, requiring you to hold the shield and wait till you can retaliate. Obviously, Pestigores have been known to ally with Nurgle Demons and Death Guard, but this would be the first Pestigore appearance we would have seen in the Warhammer 40k universe in fucking ages. However, it's not unlike Games Workshop to give game developers freedom if it helps improve their game and make more money. Total War Warhammer is one of the best examples of this, with the Vampire Coast being made out of completely nowhere with only a little bit of lore to go on, so it's very possible Pestigores could have an appearance in Darktide, especially working in the Underhives. Moving on to special enemies, this is probably where we will see most variation in enemies come from, similar to how Vermintide launched with 4 different types, 5 if you count the Sack Rat. For my first special, it is a variant of the Poxwalker, similar to the bloated corpses from Total War Warhammer. This enemy would make gurgling and slurping sounds to let you know it's nearby, and its primary job would be to run towards you and explode either by getting shot or getting in range of you to do damage. We did have a very similar enemy to this in Vermintide, which was the Suicide Bowel Rats, which if you ever went up against were an absolute pain in the arse to deal with. However, due to Darktide having more range options, I believe we could have explosive enemies be more balanced. I think something to stress is that specials are meant to change the gameplay and make you feel on your toes. They're not meant to be your standard enemy dealt with the normal way. They perhaps might incapacitate a player, forcing others to help like hook rats and assassins, or provide an area of effect that either buffs, debuffs or damages like standard bearers and gas rats. My next special is the Sloppity Bile Piper. God, I love that name. Sloppity Bile Pipers are plague bearers who have been punished for not counting correctly and are given the disease called chortling murrain. I'm probably not saying that right, but who the fuck cares. This results in the plague bearer being gifted with a gut pipe and a marotta. The Sloppity Bile Piper will then play music to please the Great Unclean Ones and to amuse Nurgle's Talibans. But when this enemy comes into combat, it can cause many problems. It's said that they can infect their enemies with the same disease, causing mortals and demons of other god to laugh uncontrollably until their hearts burst or their sides split open. Whilst playing its pipes, it can also encourage nearby plague bearers, but I would prefer it does not have that role, and instead you hear the music of a Sloppity Bile Piper from a distance, and one of your teammates starts laughing uncontrollably, not being able to move, and it takes damage at the same time, and you have to find the Piper and kill them to free your teammates. This would have a similar playstyle to your hook rats and assassins, and we definitely need enemies that can kill players when they go on their own and get isolated, or are the last ones alive. My next special could possibly be chosen to do a few things. We all know Plague Sorcerers are a thing in 40k, and it would be very surprising if we don't see some form of caster enemy in the game. For balance purposes, it will most likely be a Plague Bearer using some minor psychic powers of Nurgle, such as Miasma of Pestilence, which creates a cloud of pestilence and insects that could follow you around and do damage, similar to the Blightstormer's Tornado in Vermintide. Or we could have something like Nausea or Nurgle's Dance, which causes once again a teammate to be incapacitated, needing someone to help them out and kill the enemy. My last special is a Plague Bearer bearing a standard 2 Nurgle, which would boost the damage resistance of all enemies inside its radius, forcing you to go for the kill on the standard bearer or the standard itself, who would be a bit harder to kill than other Plague Bearers, but nonetheless is the same enemy. I'm very interested to see what Fatshark come up with for their special enemies, as they are quite hard to think up and also to balance. Moving on to monsters, the first one I'm going to talk about is Poxbringers. They are the lieutenants of Great Unclean Ones and stand taller and broader than other Plague Bearers that surround them. They are blessed by Nurgle for proving themselves in battle, first by having one of their horns sprout and misshapen, and then followed by the sprouting of a row of rotting antlers as if to crown them for their achievements in battle. What makes Poxbringers great at leading Plague Bearers is that they project an aura of disease, which becomes almost of a hazy fog around them. This fog can also empower fellow minions of Nurgle, making them great at leading the charge in battle. And in battle, they are no pushover, being basically invulnerable to damage, and with the ability to use psychic powers and a Bale sword, they can do some serious damage in combat. The Poxbringer would be a very hard monster to take on in combat, requiring you to use range weapons at first to get its health down before going into melee with it. It would also throw up, similar to the Patrol in Vermintide, denying space and causing damage if you got in the way. They would also have this diseased fog around them that perhaps was activated every 20 seconds or so, which buffed nearby troops' speed and damage, so Nurglings and Poxwalkers might become a far more threatening enemy. And lastly, the Bale Sword would hit no different to Trolls attacks in Vermintide, doing serious damage and perhaps some dot or damage over time, representing Nurgle's disease. My next boss is the one that everybody already knows about, the Plague Ogryn. This is where an Ogryn has been heavily mutated by the power of the Chaos God Nurgle. Ogryns are great places for the effects of Nurgle to take place, as their hygiene is already terrible, being ideal breeding grounds for all nightmarish plagues of all kinds. In battle, Plague Ogryns are almost impossible to kill, and the merest touch can bring almost certain death. The Plague Ogryn, I imagine, is going to have a similar playstyle to your Rat Ogres, but only without the jumping, and your Chaos Spawn when it comes to damage and being an absolute fucking nightmare to deal with. I also would imagine that the Plague Ogre should have some sort of form of regen, or perhaps instead has moments where an ability like Disgustingly Resilient takes place, causing it to take less damage. My next monster is a Plague Drone. Now, I know these guys are usually used by mounts as Plague Bearers, but hear me out. Fat Shark have said that they are going in the direction of having the ranged weapons as more of an option when compared to the melee. This gives them a lot more choices when it comes to enemy types, especially when facing a foe like Nurgle who wants to be in close combat to infect you. The Plague Drone would not be mounted but instead be its own enemy, flying around the area, charging at players with its abdomen and scythe-looking arms, whilst at the same time would be dropping disturbing gifts from Nurgle on the floor, denying areas and causing damage. I think a Plague Drone would make a great monster fight, but obviously I can understand some people's concern about the Plague Drone being a bit too powerful of an enemy, but when compared to a monster in Vermintide, for example take Death Rattler with his miniguns, that would kill our heroes outright in Vermintide if it stuck to the lore, but obviously it doesn't. Also, you can dodge behind buildings to avoid damage, and I imagine a similar mechanic with the Plague Drone could be introduced where you dodge behind a wall when it charges you with its abdomen. Now, those are my bosses for Darktide, however, there are two more that I could be seeing added just as a filler, and once again, I would not complain. The first is a Chaos Spawn. They exist in 40k, and Fat Shark have the model, so why not add it in for more content? It would make sense, but would people think that's cheap? And obviously the same goes with the Minotaur. You could add it into Darktide as a Pescator. I just made that up, but I don't know what Minotaurs are called when they're devoted to Nurgle. But once again, it's another monster they could add. However, you could look at the flip side and say, well, why don't they add demons into Vermintide since they exist in fantasy as well from the game? This is something that I think we could be seeing. Vermintide have already announced a Chaos Wasteland expansion, and it's said that Vermintide and Darktide run on the same engine. This is why it's most likely whatever we see in Darktide will be DLC for Vermintide later down the line. Moving on, we have the last section of the video, and that is Lords. If you've made it this far, you are a true son of Papa Nurgle, and he will allow you to play in his garden. For Lords, usually looking at Vermintide, it's not too hard to have a fair idea of what we could be going up against. It will most likely be a similar situation where we have 4 Lords like in Vermintide 2, which we have to kill individually, with each one being a more powerful version of a boss or special unit. The first one I believe we could be seeing as a Lord is a Sloppity Bilepiper. This would be similar to Burble Spew Hail Scourge from Vermintide 2. The Sloppity Bilepiper would debuff you with spells and other effects, whilst at the same time you would be attacked by Poxwalkers, Nurglings, Plague Bearers and Chaos Cultists, which would also be encouraged by the music to do more damage. You would obviously fight waves of enemies before the Sloppity Bilepiper would engage and fight you for himself, a standard boss fight and really the first introduction to one. My next 2 Lords would be Heralds of Nurgle. The first would be a Spoilpox Scrivener, and they make sure that Plague Bearers do not shirk. They record the number of diseases counted by Plague Bearers, whilst verbally browbeating all around them. They long to catch their fellow Plague Bearers out, or record enough to punish them. When a Spoilpox Scrivener is nearby, all Plague Bearers do their duties more efficiently, increasing their speed and number of attacks. This boss battle would see you fighting a lot of Plague Bearers and Standard Bearers, with the odd Nurgling jumping around and laughing here and there. The Spoilpox Scrivener would engage every now and then to use his Plague Sword, the Steaded Maw, which is the fucking weird mouthing attached to him, and the rare Sneeze now and then causing damage, whilst at the same time buffing nearby Plague Bearers in between boss sequences. The other Herald of Nurgle would be a Poxbringer riding a Plague Drone. This would be a similar boss fight to Rasnid and Death Rattler, where the Plague Bearer would be riding the Plague Drone trying to attack you, where you would have to use cover to dodge around the incoming charge. And after enough damage has been dealt, they would separate, becoming separate entities, where the Plague Drone would still require range attacks to be killed, whilst the Plague Bearer could be taken down by melee attacks, whilst at the same time you were being attacked by all enemy types such as Infantry, Elite and Special. Personally, this to me would be a really fun boss battle, and I do hope we get something similar to this in game. The last and final Lord, you guessed it, is a Plague Marine. Now, come on, fucking PC Gamer said Plague Marines would make good bosses, so attack them, don't hate on me. I'm clearly not the only one who thought of this. Anyway, at the end of the day, Plague Marine are Astartes, and they are no fucking joke. They are fast, even if devoted to Nurgle, so how could we make one work? Well, you'd only be facing one. Not 2, not 3, just 1 Plague Marine. And Plague Marine do like their melee weapons such as scythes or man rippers with the one I'm showing in the picture. I know in the picture it's the Death Shroud, but still it does look cool. And at the same time, a Plague Caster is known for summoning Plague Bearers to the battlefield. And that's our boss battle right there. This Plague Marine would charge towards you, swing its giant scythe or man ripper that could one-shot you, and you would have to block. To do damage, you'd either have to shoot the tentacles or pipes to expose weak spots, as the armor would be far too powerful to penetrate, and the boss phase would have the Plague Marine becoming invulnerable for a few seconds, while it casts spells to summon Plague Bearers and other enemies around to tar pit you. A Plague Marine, in my opinion, would be the cherry on top. Even if some people say it's too powerful or it has problems, come on. Let's try and encourage to shove as much of 40k as we can into this game. We've not had a great looking Chaos Space Marine since Space Marine. It's been far too long, and I would love to see what a gorgeous Plague Marine model would look like in a game. Also for GW, it would make more sense having a Plague Marine as a final boss, as it would mean people would recognise them in their stores, and I imagine Games Workshop is definitely going to advertise this game in their stores with posters, similar to what they did with Dawn of War 3, saying you've played the game, now play the tabletop version sort of thing. Anyway, I was going to talk about other DLC we could be seeing and talk about the other Chaos Gods, faction, race and units we could be seeing, but with this video over 20 minutes, I imagine no one stayed this far, but if you did, I truly thank you, and may you have Papa Nurgle's blessing of invulnerability to COVID-19 when it comes your way. Anyway, hopefully future videos won't be this long, as there are many topics about Darktide I still want to talk about, but let me know what you think. I try to read every comment and I really want to know what people think. Do you disagree that what I've said in the video, or do you think I've missed units? Also, do you think we will have the same amount of enemy units or enemies as Vermintide 1 or 2? It's a big question. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.